Great,
Great,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Why don't we go ahead and get started then? The agenda is very simple. We're going to try a simple fix to very complex problems just to get the conversation started. We're going to look at how we've faced adversity, one problem that everybody's dealt with. Second, we're going to move on to thinking about how have we adapted? What have we done in terms of remote media production that might have solved the problem, at least for now? And then looking forward, what would be a more permanent solution, or at least the next thing we think will work that we'd like to institute now that we have a little bit more time. The structure of the meeting will be very simple as well. We'll have kickoff panelists that will introduce themselves in a second, and all five of us will give an extremely brief starting answer to the question, so that when Kate opens up the general discussion for about 10 minutes for each of these three sections, everybody has sort of an idea of what it is we want to talk about, and that everybody can offer their good ideas. And like I said, we'll kick it off by thinking about what were the main challenges. First, let's meet our panelists, perhaps. My name is Mark Peddledy, Communication Studies. My PhD is in anthropology. I do media anthropology, and I've been teaching production mainly within other courses, but I've also taught audio production. And next, I'd like to introduce, I think next up on the list, Kate, is Dawn. Dawn, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dawn Schott-Klaasbach, and I'm a lecturer also in communication studies. I teach media production courses, intro to TV studio, and creating a TV pilot for a series. And my MFA is in art.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And Lisa.
I'm Lisa Hutchinson. I teach with Dawn and Rebecca and Elza in the Communication Studies department, and I teach media production as well. I teach the intro and advanced class. My master's is actually in education.
Great, and thank you. Elza.
Hi, I am a fourth-year graduate student in the Department of Communication Studies. I research environmental media, environmental films, and I currently teach advanced video production course offered by the Communication Studies department. And in past, I had taught intro to video production courses.
Great, and finally, Rebecca.
Your mic is mute, Rebecca.
Hi, sorry. I am also a lecturer in communication studies. I teach video production.
Great, okay, well, let's kick it off. Our first, as I said, this is the structure. We'll have the panelists say, very quick comments, and then everybody else will go, and then everybody else will have open discussion. So let's move right into the first one, which is facing adversity. And I would say I've already given my answers to these questions in a video that I created, and I think you've all gotten that link on the registration. So you can really watch that there, and I'm not going to want to belabor the point here. And I will also put that link in the chat at least a couple times. But first, I'd say one of the main challenges I dealt with is I had a public event scheduled as part of their final media project, and clearly that had to change. So I guess we'll just go down that same order. Dawn, can you tell us what one of your major challenges?
Sure. All my students in my creating a pilot for a series class, they were just about to go into production. They had done all their pre-production. They had scouted locations and cast all their actors. But then suddenly we had social distancing and we could not do the productions.
Great, thanks. Elza. Elza, you're muted.
Thank you. For me, my students were supposed to shoot their second production, which is basically a public service announcement, and they had 6 people in their teams and then additional actors. So basically that couldn't happen. So that was the biggest challenge I faced.
Excellent. Okay, Lisa.
Mine is exactly the same as Elza's because we were teaching the same class. I had teams set up. Their public service announcement was to work with a client to create something for a nonprofit, like Elza said, in teams with equipment, talent shooting remotely, and we could not do that.
All right, thank you. And Rebecca, finally.
I maybe thought a little more generally about this question than I was meant to, but I'm thinking about kind of some of the specific stuff around experiential learning that has been a challenge, particularly around group work. I know for us in comm, our production model really emphasizes collaboration, teamwork, communication. So kind of finding new tools to do that while fighting drift in terms of student engagement and obviously social distancing. I think has been a really vexing challenge. And I also wanted to just squeeze out another second here to talk about the way in which this whole crisis is exacerbating inequality. And I have some concerns that I'm hoping we can talk about what this has meant for differences in student learning as we've asked them more to rely on their own resources, which is great in some ways, but in some ways I feel like students who don't have those resources are having a really meaningfully different experience. And even students with privilege, I don't see how anybody's going to get an iPhone screen fixed right now or any of those many points. So thinking about inequality and thinking about collaboration are sort of the big things in terms of experiential learning generally and video production that I was thinking about for today.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for bringing that up. And as I was hoping we could kind of truncate the sort of problems issue to get onto some solutions. But now we're going to turn it over to Kate and she'll put it in a gallery view so everybody can weigh in with what has been a big challenge you faced during this period.
Yeah, everyone, thanks again for being here. I'm Kate Martin from the Center for Educational Innovation. What are some of the challenges that you all have faced or anticipate facing if you have to do this in the future? And you can just unmute your mic and take turns. You can also pop your answers into the chat, whichever you prefer. Valerie?
Go ahead and say one of the first challenges we had over the School of Journalism is, of course, right at the very time we shut down was the time where all of a sudden we couldn't issue equipment anymore. And students were moving into major production phases. So they didn't have access to the kind of gear we would usually get them. So we had to move them onto using mobile devices. So it was a quick turnaround to try to find software that would enhance what you could do with a mobile phone, whether you were working with an Android device or an iOS device. Finding what those were, making sure that we were finding software that would lead people into having to use the things they would expect in a professional camera. So everything from white balance, formats, all of those things, and making sure people understood how all of those things worked, what they meant. And then down to things like what is a good program for being able to record your voiceovers and things using your phone. And then getting into instructions, well, how can you make your phone an effective audio recording device? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we had to deal with it. I mean, fortunately, Adobe gave us a resolution to having access to some sort of software that students would normally be using. But we had to get them through that. Before you can edit, you have to acquire things. And how could we do that in a way that was at least emulating what you would have to learn and of course with more professional equipment.
Okay, thanks, Wally. Someone else.
I'm guessing that there's other people that have run into problems as far as what they're doing in terms of production in their programs. So it'd be great to kind of get those on the table. And if not, we can move into solutions, but it'd be great to hear from anybody that's sort of run into problems with this.
Also at the School of Journalism, I teach those context courses, but as part of one of my course, which is a large enrollment class open to everyone at the university, I had students do a multimedia project using different types of digital technology, and Scott Spicer knows a lot about that project. I'm considering dropping it, and the reason is it's not necessary for the course, but also because I have some questions around inclusion and inclusivity, and as it was mentioned earlier by Rebecca, of access to different types of technology from students and level of knowledge of the technology that may not be achieved. And one concrete example doesn't come from my own experience, but I know that in the games course that we're teaching, there are students that just don't have laptops, right? Or they don't have all of the things that you would need to do some production. So I'm curious to learn more about what is the thinking around these questions of diversity and equity around the production.
Yeah, lots of nodding to that. Do others have experienced the challenges around student access and the equity question that was brought up, or other variations on that with regard to your media production courses?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for hosting this. Maybe just to follow up, hi, Mark, just to follow up on that question, you know, I'm not teaching a production class, but a lot of students are doing production heavy assignments for the last 2 assignments in the class. And for a lot, one of the things that they've mentioned, although they almost seem embarrassed to mention it, is that lack of computing power, sometimes just the lack of a computer altogether. And it was something that we heard through CLA was a possibility of getting loaner machines out, but getting that word out to the students seems to have somehow not come through. And I think some were not also willing to push the point that I need a computer to write the paper. I had 2 students write their papers on their cell phones, and it literally took me a while to figure why they would do that until it dawned on me. So I think it's been a bigger issue than maybe we're finding out. And it's one that also for a couple of students who have thought about dropping or have asked about dropping, not just my class, but other ones that I'm advising them for, sometimes that technology is a key lack. Thanks.
I was going to say I had a student whose computer broke, and she sent this just deeply apologetic email to the professor on record. And there was a laptop loaner policy, and I knew about it, and I was able to help facilitate instructor and whatever. But that, I mean, this is a resource student whose computer just blew up. And we talked about this in the studio stakeholders meeting. This almost needs to be like, in my opinion, and it's not the same thing, but a letter from the DRC. Like there needs to be a way to very early decouple any kind of shame about not owning, having, knowing. And how do we get those resources out? And I think the reason why they're hesitant to say there are loaner machines is simply they don't want to bleed technology, but there's got to be some sort of thing that meets the students where they are, because there's going to be a lot of shame and we're just going to lose them. And that's just horrible.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation focused on students, equity, and their needs, as well as how to keep them engaged and keep them feeling good about the classes that they're enrolled in. What other challenges related to this or the nitty-gritty tech skills that Wally talked about have you been facing, or are you thinking about as you wind up this semester or think about summer or fall? Any other challenges you want to bring into the space?
Well, I can go again here, and I can tell you one thing is remotely supporting students, even if they have the hardware, there's usually a point somewhere along the way where they run into some kind of additional technical issue. Yesterday we had a class where there was an assignment due. This is an example. The assignment was due at the end of the day yesterday. 2 students had wild technical problems that they ran into that were related to things that students, their hardware seemed to be working, but there were little missteps that they had made at the very beginning of setting up a project. Or just dealing with things like, how is your drive formatted? Even though you're running Windows 10, what are the things we're running into? Those are things that if they happened in person, and if they happened where we had the equipment accessible, we probably would have been able to solve the problem in 5 minutes at most. When it happens remotely, you end up having to, it's email exchanges, or even if you try to do Zoom, you have to try to help students. I need you to find this information for me. If I were there, I could figure it out very quickly, but I need to show you, where do you go in and find out how your drive is formatted? How do you find out the properties for a project you've worked at? Can we identify where there's a conflict there? And as you start getting more and more students working remotely, and you have differences in operating systems, you have differences in hardware, and then they all come at once, because of course, everybody gets their assignments done well ahead of the deadline, right? So you can all of a sudden have this mad time where you've got 2 or 3 hours where you're scrambling, trying to work out a solution. And one of the things, of course, that happens when you're working from home, now we don't have the university's great, internet service, so we don't have those great lines. So
Mhm.
so for instance, when it came out to me yesterday, I was able to download some student files, take a look at them, convert them, and then try to upload them back to Google Drive so they could get to them. And I'm dealing with consumer upload speeds. So it took hours. I mean, in some cases I could make an adjustment and I could pull things back to try to reduce file sizes so I could upload them more quickly. And I think we got a resolution for it. But if I had, say, even 2 more problems like that to deal with in the space of time, that's a lot for the technologists behind the scenes to work with. And it's a lot for the instructors, even if they know what they're doing. It's a lot for them to deal with when they have 20 students all of a sudden encountering problems.
Right. And teaching online or teaching remotely and connecting with students, especially under these circumstances, already takes a lot more time when you're not dealing with those kinds of issues that you described, Wally. I'm looking at the registration spreadsheet. So some of the things that that haven't been mentioned yet specifically that some of you identified when we asked what's the most vexing problem that you've encountered when teaching media production right now. And one of the other challenges identified is finding formats for student presentations that are challenging without a steep learning curve that's only about the software. So I appreciated that challenge. And just doing hands-on instruction and guidance that's needed for film projects. And let me see if there's one more that we haven't touched on yet. Adapting technology to meet online editing needs. So some real specific kinds of vexing problems that some of you mentioned in registration. So any other challenges that you'd like to list out before we start talking about solutions?
Well, if I can jump in, my name's Jim Snapgo. I teach in SCMC, and I teach an intro filmmaking class and an advanced filmmaking class. The one thing that I like to bring to all of the students' projects is my own experience over the last 25 years of doing it and being able to do it economically and efficiently, and showing them in their individualized projects like shortcuts and ways to do things that I can't do right now, which I think is, from what I'm understanding, a roadblock. Students suddenly, they might have access to the software, but suddenly they run into a problem that they don't know how to navigate, and it would literally take me 20 seconds to show them how to do it, for instance. And it could be a shortcut or some kind of setting. And it actually might be the difference in finishing a project and just sort of throwing their hands up versus actually moving on and feeling confident. So I think I'm just sort of seconding what I'm hearing from everybody, is just to be able to be there with them, because the projects that I assign my students are very individual. They're making their own films. They're not based on a template. So I have to be able to navigate a dozen or more different projects depending on how many people are how many students I have. And that's sort of gone. I can't give them that individual sort of instruction. And that's probably the biggest frustration. Graham, you had said, just the computing issues. I think that's another thing. I have students who have contacted me where they were able to download the software, but they have drivers that aren't compatible. They aren't able to actually make the software function the way it's supposed to. And that's enough for them to go, well, why, what am I supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I think we're going to go back to, I'm going to share my screen here. And Mark is going to cue us up for talking about how we adapt to these challenges.
Yeah, and I would say my quick answer to the question of adaptation, one has been that when I mentioned my problem being that one of the problems is that they were going to do a public event, I switched a little bit more to the material culture part of the assignment. And that might be partly idiosyncratic, but I had them using more of the material resources, interpretive resources in the parks and field sites where they were working outside, and they could do so safely. So that was sort of a solution. Also getting creative, I literally gave them a creative alternative option to the more standard assignment where they were able to go out and do it in various multi-modes. And one thing that I'm somewhat fortunate in is for 4 or 5 years I've been teaching this course this way. And at a certain point, I realized video was not the best way to do it, including for the reasons of equity, et cetera, that people have mentioned here. It just wasn't possible to send them out and expect them to all be able to do that and to do it, you know, successfully. So I switched to audio. So the other idiosyncratic thing would be I teach audio. When they're doing podcasts, I found virtually no students that aren't able to get a hold of a friend or somebody that they're cohabitating with and co-social distancing with, that they can't do something with audio. And so it's actually not been a huge problem in that regard. But I think of those of you doing video, which is almost everybody, it becomes a much more vexing problem. So let's move on now to here in order again. Elsa, I know that you had a really excellent adaptation to the social distancing in terms of how they would do their video assignment.
Yes, so since they could not do the group activity, I gave them the liberty to choose what they want to do. I just shared a link, you can watch it later on. So basically, I told my students to go for something that Mark just mentioned, a creative video project. So instead of asking them to do a 2 to 3 minute production or 3 to 5 minute production, I just asked them to do a 1 to 2 minutes, and some of them took the creative liberty. And I did not tell them what to do with their 1 to 2 minutes. I just gave them some very basic minimum production criteria, and then I told him to use whatever available technology you have. It can be your phone, it can be the very basic free phone editing softwares, and then not giving them proper guideline. Actually, I mean, in giving them proper guidelines for the basic requirements, but not in terms of topic. So that turned out really great. And I also told them that do something while performing social distancing. So that's one of the requirements. And then they came up with some really innovative project ideas, and they created their own videos where they either they shoot with their phones with like selfie modes, or just some of them had friends helping with it. But then again, yeah, they did come up with some really great productions when I gave them the creative liberty to work on what they wanted to work on.
Oh, Mark, you're muted.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. And now Dawn.
Hey, yeah, so would I be able to share my screen a little bit, you think?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Stop sharing here.
Okay. Just so that I don't think I know a lot of you are aware of what this is already, but so my students already had or were supposed to have storyboards completed for their projects. So I decided that it made sense to just not do the video and just to take their storyboards and edit them in something that's called an animatic. And an animatic is stills that you edit together in like you would a video, and then you can also add some transitions. And this is a zoom that's created with some keyframing. And the issue that came up with this project is their ability to draw. So there's some other options for students. The university has this stock content, so they could grab images from the university's stock content library, or they could take photos. And you could do stills that way. This is, of course, wouldn't work with social distancing unless it was like your brother. But yeah, so that was the project accommodation that I came up with for my students.
Excellent. Thanks, Dawn. And Lisa.
Should I unmute? My students were challenged to create a PSA for a nonprofit client, and they had to work as a team. That was my challenge. They couldn't do that, but I wanted to still keep the team element. I thought it was important, and I know that when we were in the classroom, they would work remotely anyway with their teams. They weren't always meeting face to face. So I thought there was some value in that. So what happened was I challenged them. They would need to work remotely with their teams using tools like GroupMe or Zoom or any of Google's suite of tools. They were already, many of them, using GroupMe anyway and familiar with Zoom because of class. And instead of working with a client, I had them choose a professionally produced PSA with a cause that they felt strongly about. And that became their client. Because after they researched that client, that organization, and the cause, they had to write kind of a research analysis piece. Then after that, they were challenged to create their own version as a team of the PSA. And I was really pleased with what they came out with. I had to adapt the written assignments as well, because what I said to them was, like Elza, you have to work with whatever is available to you. You have to talk to your team, and you have to figure out what kind of resources you have available, because you don't have the resources you normally would. So that's kind of where I started. So they had creative freedom to design it, and they used their available resources. They had to start by submitting a production design proposal, because I had no idea how they were going to go about it, or what story they were going to tell or approach, etc. So I had them submit a proposal to me, and they met with me as a team. Half of them chose to. That was optional. And they had to talk about the minimum criteria for the PSA, what was their approach, those kinds of things. They had to minimally write for their production book a script, a storyboard, and a sound design. And then we talked a little bit and brainstormed as a class about what kind of things could they do. And we talked about some of them could use their phone to shoot video, they could use photos, infographics, voiceovers, all of those kinds of things, depending upon what they had available. And we put together, in one of my Canvas discussion posts, I put together something called Tech Tools. And it was an informal list of a number of different software resources that were out there that they could potentially use, that I heard from other colleagues. And the same that Dawn mentioned is I also referred them to the stock content, video blocks, audio blocks, graphic blocks. After they created their first rough edit, we went ahead and did critiques as a class. They did updates, they submitted their final, and they approached it all of them approached it differently, but I think they were all successful. And then their last task, as it would have been if we were in class, was they have to submit a reflection paper about their role, what it was like to work with the team, and about the production itself. So some things I was able to keep, and I tried to still provide guidelines, but I still really had to open it up, like Elza said, whatever you can come up with, because they had to use what they had available.
That sounds like an excellent set of ideas. Thank you. And let's go to our final panelist, Rebecca. Some of the things, ways that, or a way you solved a vexing problem you faced. Again, muted, Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best stuff that happened to me, I'm, for better or worse, kind of stumbled into more than purposefully designed from the ground up this time. But I did find, as far as like dealing with group work, one of the kind of things that happened in my Zoom meetings in particular was that it sort of sounded like nobody was doing any reading, which meant that it was an opportunity to sort of quickly shift gears and start talking about group work and doing more group work coaching than I normally have time to do in a semester where we're trying to do studio work. So that was great, but also kind of seeing students taking initiative around group work, learning to set up their own Zoom meetings and connecting with each other was, I think, getting me towards feeling more comfortable about the collaborative aspects. And the other thing that I think was great advice that's been coming from everywhere, and I didn't apply it as purposefully as I might have, but some stuff, good stuff happened anyway, was doing stuff related to the pandemic. Certainly, like some of my students, we were doing advertising parodies, and a lot of them took the initiative to do an advertising parody about like COVID related advertising, which we had talked about briefly in class, but I was surprised how many people sort of took that track. And just the moments where I've sort of brought them in on helping us figure out how we're going to make do, brainstorming solutions to people not being able to draw, and like what are some other, how do we build sets out of Triscuit boxes and dollhouse furniture and take pictures of them. So I think those moments where students have really kind of pitched in the crisis of this have been the best things that I've been feeling this semester.
Those are great.
Excellent, thank you. And sorry, moving over to you, Kate. I'm really excited to hear, including folks like Adam and Laura here, you probably have some excellent solutions, including technological solutions that the rest of us haven't thought of.
Yeah, I agree. And I really appreciate the way Mark framed up this question as what has worked, at least sort of, to meet the challenges that you face, because that is the space that we're in. And the ideas that we have just heard from Rebecca, Don, Elsa, Mark, and Lisa are really, really creative and really flexible adaptations that I'm sure students have appreciated, despite their, issues with access to technology and things. So for participants, what are some of the things that you've done that have worked, or as you listen to other people's challenges, what are some of the ideas that you would bring to them as possibilities? Mark, who did you called out a couple names here, people that you thought would have some things to share? Or those individuals?
Oh, I didn't want to have to call people out, but for example, Adam, I know has a lot of hands-on production experience and with the tech and at Lattice, and Laura certainly as well. I mean, across the board, we have a sort of a wealth of a brain trust of knowledge around actual production methods. So if we're hearing any kinds of possibilities in these problems that are raised that people could solve, for example, Rebecca's point of equity is still right there. Are there some flexible, adaptable ways that we could look at that and go, this is right now, this is maybe how we can solve that problem as we come into final projects, for example.
Thanks for the shout out. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I have other people in my office. One thing that I thought of as a possibility is surveying all the students in your class beforehand and finding out what kind of technology they have, and then tailoring your projects to what they have available. And certainly for the students who are lacking, connecting them with us, and we can try to help them find equipment. I think for the next couple of months, we're probably going to be looking at using our budget that maybe was purchasing other equipment for common use to possibly purchasing equipment that will be more adaptable to individual use. One other thing I wanted to say is actually Adam and I and other people on our team are going to start working to put together kind of a list of scenarios and ways that we can support those scenarios. So are we going to be fully online? How can we help with that? Are we going to be hybrid? Here's the ways we can help. So hopefully very soon we'll have kind of concrete ways that we can provide our service to you in ways so that you can adapt your class to that. And we also are going to look into kind of scouring our expertise and maybe coming up with suggestions for projects we might see and how they can be adapted to just, for however you want to take that.
Laura, I'm sorry, I think I missed this. What is the entity where you work?
Sorry, I work in Lattice, Liberal Arts, Technologies and Innovation Services, and we are media services and then even more refined video services. And that's in Rarig Center. So we have the studios that many of these classes are meeting in, and we also have a pretty extensive video production loaner pool. So a lot of that equipment is just sitting on shelves right now.
That's great to know. What are some other solutions or adaptations that have worked or partially worked, or that?
I just wanted to say that I can help support too. My name is Greg Steinke, and I'm a media specialist for CCAPS, and we do mostly online courses. So I have a lot of experience putting together resources about various free tools, tools that the youth supports, and tools that stand up, and we have tutorials for. And then I can also meet with students as well. So I just wanted to let everyone know that I can be there for support.
And CCAPS is College of Continuing and Professional Studies?
Yeah.
Did I get it right? Okay.
Yep.
And then Kate, if I could just real briefly again, just introduce myself. So I'm Scott Spicer, Media Services, and we also provide more lower barrier support, typically for the non-media intensives on campus. And we do also have equipment loaner pool, and we're doing on-demand online remote support right now. So I've put a lot of our resources into the chat if you need support for your projects.
Do all three of you support students as well as faculty and instructors?
We're primarily students, but we do some faculty lower barrier stuff.
Yeah, for any like podcast assignments or media assignment that we do, I pretty much act as the primary go-to tech support person for student help.
Okay.
And our bread and butter is students, but we are open to anyone in the College of Liberal Arts, staff, faculty, everybody can access our equipment and spaces.
Great. Thank you all for being here and for all that you're doing. So other solutions or adaptations, answers to these challenges that you heard? I would invite the panelists as well to share like things that you are thinking about as you heard the challenges folks listed. Valerie, I see you unmuted.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just thinking about how it could be helpful to see. So all of these are kind of are good tools that we're using and really good strategies, but how it would be interesting to see kind of a document or something that talks about the culture around that. Like, so we've talked about flexibility, we've talked about kind of different strategies that we can foster before going into like a specific example. I know I think that I'm vague, but I think there's some like kind of online learning educational strategies around equities, and then listing underneath them some of the examples that we've had would be very helpful for someone who just kind of sort of needs a cheat sheet to figure out what they need to do in their class. I don't know if that makes sense, but
You're talking about like some of these principles that sort of guide whatever you decide to do, you know, and think about accessibility, think about being flexible.
Flexibility,
yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
It gives like more kind of, in a weird way, it also gives more flexibility for instructor to choose to have the feeling that they can choose what works for their students.
You know, that really cued for me something that seems to be working, that the students really have figured out. And when I mentioned a creative alternative, what I threw out to them was a possibility of going out and doing a song, poem, a performance, a monologue, a painting out in a park where they were working as their field site. And the stuff they came up with really solved some of these problems for me. And they did do video work if that was their thing. And they sort of had to instantiate the ethos of sustainability, environmental justice, and equity in their actual project. And they came up with things that I could have never imagined. And so I think even the idea of opening up to the creativity and just saying, this is our problem together, you know, equity, access, et cetera, how are we going to solve it, can sometimes help in a certain way. Not perfect, but something that certainly helped me in my next steps.
You know, I want to move us on to this idea of thinking ahead to the future. And I think that as we have additional adaptations and solutions and creative ideas around the challenges that have been listed, we can roll those into this discussion about what's next in the future. Mark, I'm going to queue up the panelists.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think I just sort of already segued myself, and that is I'm going to try to do more of what I just said. Give them the examples from this past semester and say, here's what Taylor Leopold did in Lebanon Hills State Park, Lebanon Hills County Park with her song. And here's what Caitlin Bonke did in terms of a painting, looking at pollution and thinking about why isn't the world always like this? You know, what are some creative solutions people came up with, and not hamstringing them in terms of media and what they're doing, so that they can adapt it to what technology they have. again, not a solution I think that everybody could do in terms of having a set course on what kind of media they're working in. So let's go now to Elza. Elza, what do you see looking forward if you're going to be teaching remotely media production and in terms of your video production? What sort of things might you do in instantiate in your future course? Is Elza still with us?
Yes. So yeah, yeah. So I don't really have like a concrete plan that I would love to repeat in future. I'm still learning and I'm taking my students' feedback. I'm just waiting for my SRTs to see how it worked this time. But one thing that I think really helped me and my students is asking them before reassigning the assignment, which is basically from a PSA group project to something individual. I just had a Zoom meeting with them and I literally gave them an option of either sticking to the PSA and doing what Lisa suggested, this paperwork and recreating the PSAs they find online versus doing something creative. And to my utter surprise, they all actually picked the creative video where they had to go through everything. They had to do everything by themselves instead of having different people assigned to different jobs. So I think that worked really well. But the downside of it is, again, this is not a group project, which was the original intention of this class, because most of our classes are based on group projects. So I'm currently trying to find out a way to give them enough freedom to pick their topics and work on it, and at the same time having some group elements to it.
All right, thank you, Elza. And Dawn, and also I should mention, Dawn is the coordinator of our media production series. So I think she has that sort of double task of having to think through this in terms of the entire curriculum as well. Dawn, what are some solutions you see as far as going forward?
Well, yeah, I'll echo what Elza said. We're still trying to figure out a lot of what's going to work best, especially when we aren't sure if we're going to be online or not in the fall. But I'm teaching an online version of my course in the summer, and I will be tweaking my animatic assignment and hopefully figuring out how that works best, and maybe we can incorporate some of those that type of assignment into our online version of classes. That's just thinking out loud.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. It's useful thinking out loud. Lisa, what sort of things, if you are going to teach this remotely, digitally this summer, this fall, moving forward, what sort of things might you work on with the time to sort of put it into the syllabus and into the course?
Gotta remember to unmute. Just want to say I do appreciate a lot of what I've been hearing from people. It's really helpful. I agree with Elza that and what you said, Mark, that if you give the students more of an open opportunity to direct their path, that can have a really positive outcome. I found that with one of the assignments I did. I liked Laura's suggestion about surveying students and figuring out what they have. We're not set up to be an online institution, and those institutions that are set up intentionally that way, the way they solve a lot of these problems is they provide their students with laptops and iPads with all the software they need. I mean, that's part of their enrollment, and we're not set up to do that as the university. So that's part of our reason we have such a challenge. And I like the idea. I just want to mention that Adam and Laura were really supportive of my students because they were able to get Premiere Pro, but then they didn't have a computer that was powerful enough to run it. So they were really, really supportive when I told them that they were able to loan my students from Lattice laptops that they could use to actually, use Premiere Pro and succeed in finishing some of their projects. So I don't think I want to give up working in teams entirely. That's part of what I'll say. I think there's value in working, even if you have to, I go on and on, so I need to cut myself off, but I think there's value in working with teams, so I don't think I want to give that up. So I'll just stop there because I could talk a lot.
No, it's been extremely helpful thoughts, and it sounds like this conundrum of individual and teamwork and how do we get people to do it serially. And also, I know several of you I have experienced how it's done in the industry. I know I have in audio where often it is done remotely and in teams. It's just not always everybody on the same page in the same place like in the classroom. So it's kind of what we're trying to figure out. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on that? If you were going to teach digitally, remotely, video production moving forward, what sort of things would you suggest?
Well, a couple of the things that I thought about, some of the most nuts and boltsy stuff, I must have had a huge teacher brain fart when I was restarting my class, and I did not sufficiently scaffold the big assignment that they're working on right now. So more interim steps and scaffolding. But also it occurs to me that's a really great way to keep up student engagement, and that it gives you an opportunity to have Zoom meetings with them where the topic of that Zoom meeting is their work and not some boring reading that they didn't want to read anyway. So really more scaffolding, more individualized engagement with their work to the extent that it's possible. I mean, I think some of the things we have to think practically about is the scalability of our labor, as well as resources like laptop checkout and stuff like that. So thinking about, and I know for me, the group work piece is a real piece of what keeps teaching this manageable in terms of my labor. So doing better scaffolding is a way of giving more feedback, but also keeping that to a manageable amount of feedback is certainly something that I'm thinking about into the next iteration.
Great, thank you so much. So Kate, take us to the final open discussion.
All right. So for everyone, what are you thinking about future oriented? What do you think will work well given more time to design these assignments, or to think about your course and getting, you know, equipment into students' hands and scaffolding in ways that will help them be successful, help students be successful? What are your thoughts? What if you could tap all of the expertise in this meeting, what would you like to do? This is your moment to dream. You can dream small. Yeah, Rebecca.
Well, so I'm sorry, I know I just stopped talking, but I will also add, I think one of the great things that's been happening all around with this kind of moment is people sharing resources and sharing knowledge. So like stuff like we're doing here, but also I know people are part of online communities. I wanted to plug a particular Facebook page. I don't know if people are on, with a long name. It's Teaching Film, Media, Screenwriting, and Production Online for COVID-19. It's had tons of really bookmarkable stuff, not just for this moment, but also I think just for teaching production in general, and has gotten way less like iffy and toxic than some of the other pandemic pedagogy type groups, I think because of the specificity of it. But that said, I'm also really hoping that within the university itself, some of these connections that we're forming in meetings like this, and some of the resources that people are throwing out, I hope we can keep those kind of centralized and shared and make use of what folks are developing right now in the community that we're creating.
Yeah, we can talk about whether this group wants to create a Google group. I don't think there's anybody here from Crookston, Morris, Duluth, or Rochester, and probably not Rochester, but those other campuses may very well have media production assignments and colleagues who would like to be a part of these conversations in the future and that resource sharing. I appreciate that.
Rebecca, Claire's requested, could you share that link in the chat, please?
Oh, someone did. Elsa did. Thank you.
Yeah, I just shared it. I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute my mic. There is one more thing. I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in. There is one more thing. If everybody here isn't already aware of it, video and that actually allows students to comment on the video simultaneously when they watch exactly at that particular point. So that has been really helpful for me to still bring in some sort of collaborative work in the project.
I was in a discussion yesterday with the fabrication shop and makerspace individuals on campus, mostly College of Design and CLA folks, but a couple of mechanical engineers. And a couple of things that came up there with regard to getting tools into students' hands was they were talking about like tapping alumni of the program to see if they would be willing to donate tools that they're no longer using. So I wonder if there's some equivalent sort of process for all of these media production courses of tapping into tools or laptops or things either from alumni or using the organization UCAN, UCAN. If you haven't heard of it, it's a group of university volunteers who want to help where help is needed, basically in any way possible. So you can go to the UCAN website and say, we need, 150 laptops with this level of software. What can you do for us? And the other thing that was shared in that session that might be useful here as you're thinking about scaffolding assignments or even reverse scaffolding is one of the clothing design professors was in the midst of having students design and sew a garment. And she pivoted in the semester because students were suddenly home. A lot of them didn't have sewing machines. So she had them, instead of build a design, she had them find some piece of clothing in their home and deconstruct it, basically use the principles of the course to talk about how a sleeve on a garment was put together by deconstructing it. And then, so kind of a reverse scaffolding of the original learning objectives. And I wonder if things like that with some of these media assignments might also work.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in. I did do that with my intro course where we were about to produce a sitcom. So instead of producing the sitcom, I had them watch a sitcom and then do a series of little assignments about transcribing dialogue and describing the shot sequence. They had the storyboard, some of the shots, and it was very similar to that, what she did.
Mm-hmm. Nice. What other things are people thinking about, ideas for the future? Or remaining questions in the time we have left?
I have one that might help stoke some of the remaining discussion. And I was just about to put it on text, but for me, it's really been essential having community partners, including experts in the community. Like I work with Carl Deemer, he's won a couple Grammys doing audio, and he does things that I cannot. And having that kind of expertise outside of the community, outside of the university, has been really essential. So I think what I was thinking with that is structurally, we've raised a lot of questions that, like we point out, we can't solve just at the course level or at the interpersonal or personal level. How do we draw on sort of community supports, things outside, and structural changes, including, for example, internship models, to get some of this expertise to students without just trying to solve it all ourselves individually? So I think that structural question can come up too if people have ideas of how we make that happen.
I'm going to jump in again. Mark, you just reminded me of an idea that came up to me while Kate was talking. I think a series of like online lectures for students from professionals in the field, something like that would be super nice to, because there's so many of us that have an interest in that area. If students from all kinds of different classes could attend, different professionals talking about what they do and allowing students to interview them, I think that would be really helpful. That would be one of my dreams.
That's great. I'm okay with silence. Yeah.
I do have another question as far as the how people use supports like that, because Dawn made me think about how using the sort of training supports that are video, the LinkedIn Learning that used to be lynda.com. I'm curious how people use that, because it's been really nice to have in terms of podcasts when they're using Audacity and GarageBand to say, watch this first and then we'll talk, and then we'll talk and then watch this, that kind of thing. The LinkedIn Learning modules, unfortunately, are getting a little dated because they've just kind of borrowed lynda.com. But how are some people using some of those supports that we might think about?
Well, I went online to view one of their full recording engineering ones because I teach audio technology in the fall. And it was really useful because they have the time to do the pre-recording and coordinating so that you can listen to both simultaneously. And I can see how that would absolutely improve my teaching. But there's always that that thing where they talk about first you observe one, then you do one, or sorry, yeah, then you're essentially, basically, you're going to get to doing it. And I am wondering if we're ever looking at a hybrid model, because in a class like that, you could front load with a bunch of lectures and knowledge base and everything, and then finally end with the more hands-on work. Or if it was possible to get together in smaller groups. I know this is a university question, but knowing this in terms of how they structure the semester is really going to help me. That's an expansion on using LinkedIn Learning. It's great, but your eyes do start to gloss over after a while. It's just true. Any online learning, you want to physically engage to cement the knowledge base, but it is really useful up front.
Along the lines of Linda, there's also Coursera, which is online courses that through, I think, the end of July, the university, Coursera has offered to university instructors all of their fully online courses and all of the materials within them for free. And so I don't know what they have there in terms of audio and video media production, but there is a University of Minnesota link on the CEI website. Maybe Claire can grab it and throw it into the chat and see if there's anything there that would also be useful in terms of that knowledge base Montana was talking about. So we're just about at time, Mark. I'm going to share this last slide. Would you like to wrap us up?
Well, just to say that, you know, I don't always say this at the end of a Zoom meeting because I often feel like the last thing we need is another Zoom meeting. But in this case, I think this relatively small group that are doing something that we all can relate to what everybody's doing. I hope we don't. I hope we don't be. I hope we're not strangers. I'd like to keep this going. You know, it's great to, for example, see Wally again, who I used to interact with a lot and draw from his knowledge. Across the board, I hope that we stay in touch and are able to make something out of this.
I agree. And we are talking about at the center running another round of these discussions in June, probably last couple of weeks of June. I know folks are off, you know, not thinking about teaching in the summer often, but that's in the works. So we'll certainly reach out again and see if this group is interested in doing that, maybe with some colleagues from the other campuses as well. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Mark, really appreciate your partnership in bringing this session together. Elza, Dawn, Lisa, and Rebecca, thank you so much for being panelists. Scott for chat monitor, and Claire for taking notes. And thank you all for being here. It really was a rich discussion. We will be sharing the video link as well as the resource that we create from the notes that'll take everything that was shared in the chat and put it together in a way that hopefully is easy to digest. So thank you all so much. And please do.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see y'all.
Thank you.